So, raise your hand if you were in Catherine and Jules' talk just now. Okay, so that really affected me. I'm still kind of affected by that. That was amazing, and I've changed the end of this talk accordingly. My tip number 7 was going to be different before now, but now I've decided it's going to be something different. So, I was in the Denver airport several years ago on my way home from some training that I had been doing. And I had like a 45-minute layover at my gate, so I grabbed a sandwich, and I was just going to sit at my gate and just kind of eat there. And so I sat across from a businesswoman in her late 30s, and she asked me the question that I spent most of my career hating. What do you do for a living? See, because the problem is I have a really weird job, and like assuming she's pro-choice, like how do I answer this question in a way that's not going to start things off kind of badly, you know? How do I answer this question? And so I said something that day that I'd never said before in describing my job, and now this is almost the only thing I say when people ask me what I do. I've got kind of two things, but when I think they might be pro-choice, I always say this. So she said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I try to help pro-lifers to not be weird." And she smiled a little bit, so it was going well. So she smiled a little bit, and she said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Well, I'm trying to help pro-life people to use more good arguments and fewer bad ones. But more importantly, what I want to do is I want to help us to connect relationally with people who are different from us, from people who are coming from a different political background, from people who are maybe coming from a different religious background. I want to help us to connect with people who are different." So I know the word weird, like in Portland, some of you are like, "We like being weird." Like it's a whole different thing here in Portland. So I want to explain to you what I mean when I say the word weird. I mean something very specific. There's kind of, I think, in the pro-life movement, a good kind of weird, and there's a bad weird. The good weird describes everybody in this room. You are spending your entire Saturday learning more than you already knew about abortion. That's kind of weird, but that's a good kind of weird because you're like, this is like human rights and justice. You want to do something, you want to have an impact, but in our society, like you caring that much about anything, kind of weird. That's good weird. The bad kind of weird, the thing that I want us to avoid, this is why like sometimes we kind of say we have a motto jokingly, DBW, don't be weird. What we mean by that is, like I don't know if you've ever seen this, but like people who are well-meaning but off-putting. I don't want us to be, I see some finger pointing in here. Okay, stop it. I don't think we should be off-putting. Like we're trying to convince people to not be pro-choice. Do you know how hard that is? That's really hard. Don't kind of shoot yourself in the foot and make it harder by being odd. So that's kind of what I meant. So, but there's kind of a scriptural version of this. Basically what I'm talking about is Colossians 4:5-6. Where it says, "Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech be always filled with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." That's what I mean. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about 7 practical dialogue tips, or kind of sort of 6 practical dialogue tips now, into something that I really care about telling you at the end. That all just kind of everything just changed for me. And so this is kind of like, earlier, a lot of you were at my first talk. That was more apologetics. I was giving you a pro-life argument that we've seen work really, really well in the past. This is different. This is just kind of, after 3,000 conversations, one of my brother and I and our other staff learned just the nitty-gritty stuff. I like the nitty-gritty. I don't like just talking about the ideas. I want to talk about, I want this to be helpful to you. I want you to be able to go and have good conversation with people about anything. And that's really important. And as I was talking to people, I did a bunch of speaking in Washington State a couple of weeks ago, and they're saying, this is so important here. We need this so badly here. And so I don't know if any of you have felt, especially in the last couple of years, that it's hard to talk to people about anything. I want to try to help make it better. So here are some of the things, after kind of going through the fire of 3,000 conversations, some of the things we've learned. And some of these might be obvious to you, and some of them might not be. A few of them are definitely fairly unique. So tip number 1, ask clarification questions. You want to ask clarification questions because you don't actually know what this person thinks, intends, or feels, as Steve Wagner at JFA says. You don't want to straw man people. But see, the problem is sometimes we make the mistake of not only assuming that we know what the other person thinks, intends, or feels, will we actually tell them what they think, intend, or feel, which is really obnoxious. Don't do that. Instead, just ask. Like, this is a different person. Like, this is so important, especially for those of you who actually talk to people about this a lot. Like, it is easier for those of us who are more experienced to assume, like, there's 5 types of pro-choice people. And kind of get this sense when we're talking to them that's like, I know where this is going. And kind of assume that because they said this thing, and I've talked to a couple of people who said that thing, I know where this person's coming from. No, not necessarily. This person might mean something completely different by that phrase. My body, my choice can mean multiple, really, really different arguments. Like the language here can be kind of vague and confusing. And so what I'm doing in my conversations, I'm asking a lot of clarification questions. I'm trying to get them to help me understand them and their views better. So I'm saying things like, you called yourself pro-choice. I have no idea what that means. I've heard that term used to describe dozens of different views about abortion. I don't care what the last person I talked to meant when she said she was pro-choice. I want to know what you mean when you say you're pro-choice. Flesh this out for me. Help me understand what that means for you. You say you're for abortion only in the first trimester. That's a common pro-life view. Could you help me understand more about how you came to that conclusion? Because there's a lot of pro-choice people who basically believe the same thing, but they got their different ways. I would love to learn more about kind of where you're coming from. People are complicated, and we should treat them as such. So we want to ask lots of clarification questions. Pro tip, though, don't ask them all back to back. I've seen well-meaning people do this. Like, they're really trying to do a good job of asking lots of questions, but then what happens is it's almost like an interview at best, or the other person might actually feel like, these conversations can be kind of intense for people. They might actually feel like they're like on the witness stand, and you're like the prosecutor. Like, that's not good. So what I'm trying to do is trying to kind of find this balance that I'm doing, a little bit different based on the person. I'm kind of trying to read the person, but I'm asking a lot of questions in the beginning to try to learn more. But every once in a while, I'm intentionally not asking the next question so I can stop and show some card myself. I don't want them to feel like I'm like trying to hide all of my views because now I'll be in a more strategic kind of position because they're the one giving out all the data. And so sometimes I'm choosing to kind of explain some things about what's going on for me, and then I might ask another question. Tip number 2, a few of these I can go fairly quickly on because I think they're pretty simple, but the second one is about listening. If you ask a question, you should listen to what they have to say. But listening in a dialogue about abortion or anything where you disagree is harder than I think most people give it credit for. It's really hard if you're pro-life and this person's really pro-choice to really hear them without having an inner monologue going on. You know what I'm talking about? The inner monologue is a little voice in your head that's like, what am I going to say next when it's my turn to talk? Like that thing. You want to try to silence that because I used to think that I could listen to people while having an inner monologue going on, and then my wife was able to show me I can't. We had some really important conversations several years ago. It took us like several of these for me to really get the lesson. So I don't know if any of you husbands can like connect with this, but I'll just say I had built up this dumb husband habit where I would come home from work and my wife would be maybe making dinner and we'd be talking about our days. And so sometimes what would happen is she's talking to me about her day while I'm also scrolling through my Facebook newsfeed. Oh, I know. Oh, you're so judgmental. Okay, here's the thing. I know now. This is really bad. But it was so innocent. I thought I was listening because I could tell that she was, talking. And I was kind of following the themes like I thought. But then every once in a while what would happen is she'd ask me like a comprehension kind of a question. And you know how that went. And so now I know. I can't okay, so it's so obvious to everyone in this room that that's not okay. And yet we do this. We're talking to pro-choice people and we're in our heads thinking here's what my inner monologue sounds like sometimes. When I'm talking to a pro-choice person, I'll be like, wow, there's a lot of things she's saying without stopping. what would be the most persuasive thing for me to say? I'm hungry. What's that thing that my wife wanted me to do when I come home today? Like, that's not listening, right? It's kind of like the difference between passive and active reading. Have you ever been reading a book and then suddenly you realize you don't know what you read for like 3 pages? Yeah, that's passive reading, and it's no good. But at least in that case, like, it's private. Like, you can just choose to go back, and rework it. If you're doing passive listening and you've not been tracking what this person's saying, it's a lot more embarrassing. It will mess up your dialogues. And so what I'm trying to do, this is an art that I'm still working on, but what I'm trying to do is basically silence my inner monologue while I'm talking to a pro-choice person. I'm trying to put that voice on mute. And just be present in the moment with her. And she's talking, and then after she finishes talking, yeah, that might mean that I might have to take a beat and just process because I haven't been in my head thinking about my next chess move. And some people watching might be like, oh, that's an awkward pause. No, that is an awesome pause. Why? Because it shows her what? It shows her that I'm taking her views seriously. It shows that I'm taking her seriously. And people aren't used to having their ideas taken seriously these days. Have you noticed? And so it's fine for her to watch me struggle a little bit or kind of think and just process and take seriously the things that she's saying. That's fine. Like, I understand a lot of times we do this because we want to make sure that pro-life people don't look dumb. Like, we want to do a good job for the sake of the pro-life movement. I care more about you showing this person that you actually care about him. And that it's not a debate, it's a dialogue. It's totally different. There's no audience. It's you and this person. So try to silence your inner monologue. The next one is to find genuine common ground when possible. I've actually had pro-life people argue to me that we shouldn't do this. I'll never forget this pro-life person, this older pro-life person who told me one time, he said, you can't find common ground with pro-choice people. It's either black or white. You either think it's okay to kill babies or you don't think it's okay to kill babies, but there's no in between. That's just not the way the world works. I've personally talked to over 1,000 pro-choice people. Almost all of them thought abortion was a bad thing. You know that most of them thought that abortion should happen less often? Some of them think that abortion actually hurts women sometimes? And that some abortions are so wrong, like late-term elective abortions or sex selection abortions, where we abort girls because they're girls. They think those are so wrong they should even be against the law. Here's the thing. There's a lot in there that I can agree with. It's our job to point that out. Don't just let it go by like Neo dodging bullets in the Matrix. You've got to point it out. Oh, I like what you said there. Yeah, I agree with that. And then you got to go to the other thing. And sometimes you can do this just with body language. And sometimes you just say it. It's yeah, I like that. It's one of the most powerful things you can say in a dialogue. Because a pro-choice person's expecting to have an awful conversation with the pro-lifer. They have caricatures in their head. And we get to play good cop, bad cop with the caricatures of the pro-life movement that's in their head. It's awesome. That's actually in a sense, there's an advantage that we have. They're not expecting the thoughtful, nice, loving pro-lifer. Because on the news, they've seen bullhorns and graphic posters. Okay? They're not expecting this. And then you end up because you're going to be intriguing to them. They're going to be, wow. And when you find common ground, you humanize yourself. You stop being an avatar and you start being a person. Where it's hey, I can find common ground with just about anybody. On all kinds of areas. So I'm not saying we only talk about that. Don't only talk about the common ground or all you've done is made a new friend. Also, if you talk about the common ground, it's going to help you to have better conversation about the things that you disagree about. It's going to help the conversation. I'm going to move on. Something else that we've started thinking about lately is this idea of rephrasing what they say. The more I talk to pro-choice people, the more I become convinced that there is a profound cultural gap between pro-life and pro-choice people. We think so differently. Pro-choice people are always thinking about the woman. Pro-life people are always thinking about who? The baby, right. And so we think so differently, it's almost like we speak different languages. Except unlike in the case of the Tower of Babel, we don't know it. So pro-life person says X and pro-choice person hears Y. Or pro-life person says A and pro-choice person hears B. And so we think good listening And adding clarity to a conversation is one of the ways to bridge that cultural gap. And so there's this thing of like we're trying to make clarity completely our responsibility. One of the things that can happen sometimes when we're talking to someone is we can be trying to really understand what they're saying and still mess it up in our own heads. It's sort of like there's this automatic thing going on when we're listening to someone. Our head is sort of doing Google Translate. You know what I mean? So have you seen those funny YouTube videos where someone will like take the lyrics from some popular song like Let It Go and they'll put it in Google Translate, they'll do like English to Spanish and then they'll do like Spanish to French. They'll do like a couple of versions and then back to English eventually. And then they'll take like the music from Let It Go but sing these new lyrics. And it's funny because it's not perfect. It's an imperfect translation. Because Google Translate's not perfect, and neither are we. Sometimes we accidentally, kind of as we're kind of rewording what we're hearing the other person say, we're getting it wrong sometimes. And so it's not enough just to listen well. You've also got to kind of double check and find out, like, are you actually understanding them? And so one of the things that we'll do is, like, especially if they said something important about their views, we'll say, okay, before I respond to that, I want to feed back to you what I hear you saying. I'm going to rephrase it. I'm going to put it in my own words, and I want you to tell me if I got it right, and if I didn't, tell me what I got wrong. And then I'll feed it back to them. Here's what I hear you saying, blah, blah, blah. And I might have to do this several times before they, like, give me the green check mark, before they say, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And that's fine. People have complicated views about abortion, and it is well worth a few minutes of my time to understand her view instead of just responding to a carbon copy picture in my head of what pro-choice people think. This is well worth a few minutes of my time. This is fine. So I'm making clarity my responsibility. Another thing we'll do sometimes is say what you don't mean. So this is sort of the reverse of that. So I'm making clarity my responsibility in the sense that I'm trying to make sure I really understand accurately what they're saying, but I'm also not going to assume that they're working as hard as I am for clarity. So I'm also bearing some of their burden to try to add extra clarity. I'm making clarity completely my responsibility. So this is sort of the other side. I'm going to try to make sure that I am being extra clear to make it as hard as possible for her to misunderstand me. And if you listen, start listening for this. I notice really good communicators just do this. I don't know if they're thinking about it or not, but I hear people do this a lot now. And it's this idea of kind of say what you mean and say what you don't mean and then say what you mean. Or maybe sometimes just say what you don't mean and say what you mean. Like you're looking for areas where there might be some confusion. I'll give you a couple of examples. Like, I don't think it's as wrong to kill an animal as it is to kill a human. I'm not saying that I think that it's okay to mistreat animals. I don't think we should be able to kick dogs because they're not persons. I just don't think that they're equal. See, I'm saying what I mean. I'm saying what I don't mean. Here's like this possible way for them to misunderstand me, saying that's not what I mean. I just mean this instead. I think it is as wrong to kill a human embryo as it is to kill a human toddler. That does not mean that I think that women who have abortions are equally culpable as a woman who would like strangle her own toddler. Because it takes so much more malice to strangle a toddler that you can see. That's just different than what most women are experiencing during an abortion. It doesn't mean like that the embryo is less valuable. It just means that culpability is different. It's a different level. Like it's not that abortion's not sin. It's very, very destructive. It's awful, but it's not as so. It's kind of like it would be easier for you to push a button that you know will kill someone on the other side of the world than it would be to strangle them. Right? So I'm just, like, this is a common area where pro-choice people misunderstand us. Because we talk about comparing embryos to toddlers all the time. They're like, so you're saying that women who have abortions are like moms that kill their toddlers in all the same way. So no, there's some differences. I could say like, I think moral relativists, like I'm not saying that moral relativists can't be good, moral, kind people. I'm saying that moral relativism cannot explain why anyone ought to be good or kind. Right? So I'm saying what I don't mean, I'm saying what I mean. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about numbers 6 and 7. Those are the easy ones. This is going to get a little more controversial. This is more unique to us. I'm going to argue that while you should make a lot of clarification questions, you should generally not make arguments with question marks on them. This flies in the face of a lot of Christian and pro-life apologetics, and that's okay. This is an area of respectful disagreement. that we have with a lot of our colleagues that we dearly respect. But this is something that, as we've had a lot of conversations, we've been thinking a lot about this idea of the use of questions in dialogue. We think you should make arguments, but we think when you make your argument, make it in a statement. Just say your argument, don't make it with a question, because question marks are very powerful things. They make people feel a certain way. They can often make people feel like they're being led. They're really powerful in a public debate. If you're in a public debate, totally use arguments with question marks a lot. It'll really help you. Because they're rhetorically powerful. That's exactly why you shouldn't use them in dialogues. Dialogues are different. You don't want to do something that has all this rhetorical power, because it's going to make the other person feel defensive. Make them feel like you're leading them somewhere. Maybe you're not. I don't think all arguments with question marks are like inherently leading. The problem is it can make them feel led. It's this idea like, well, it seems like if X is true, then wouldn't Y be true also? Like, they kind of feel like I don't even know what I want to say right now because I don't know where you're going. Like, they feel like you're leading them somewhere. They don't know where, but they don't like where it's going, and they don't like it shuts them down. It makes a wall go up. And that's bad. We don't want walls up between us and the people we're having conversations. In fact, a lot of the ways that we think about arguments, like the equal rights argument that I talked about earlier, like the design of that is we're going around one of their walls by getting them talking about something else that they're like really passionate about and then connecting it to abortion. So we're thinking about how do we get around the walls that we have? We don't want walls to go up, especially because there's already a wall up with the person before I've even opened my mouth. Because the more I talk to pro-choice people, the more I'm amazed by the amazing ability of the human being to believe what it wants to believe. And we all do this. Isn't this like pro-choice people? Oh, pro-choice people do it. Like we do this. This is like human nature. We believe what we want to believe sometimes. So I think there are some pro-choice people, not all, but I think there are some pro-choice people that are primarily pro-choice because they want to be. And they've told themselves whatever they had to tell themselves for maybe years before I've gotten to them. Whatever they had to say to make them pro-choice. It's not a baby. It's not a baby. It's not a baby. Her body, her choice. Her body, her choice. Her body, her choice. Pro-lifers are mean. Pro-lifers are mean. Pro-lifers are mean. Like whatever they had to say to build up this wall. This is why sometimes graphic images just bounce off. Like the Christian language here would be they've hardened their heart. They've gone through this process of making it so that their moral compass doesn't work very well anymore. It doesn't point north on this subject anymore. So I don't want walls to go up. Because if you go to someone and start asking them questions that make them feel led, a second wall is going to go up. It's kind of like the scene from Return of the Jedi. Anyone remember this? Where they're trying to get into the base on Endor. And so R2-D2 is going to try to hack into it, but then he gets shot by the one stormtrooper who's ever hit anything in his life. And so he's down. And then so Han Solo kind of shrugs and says, I guess I'll hotwire it. Because apparently the Galactic Empire is using the same technology as old cars. So he opens up this panel and starts messing with these wires, and then there's this little gag moment where he clearly connected the wrong wires, and instead of the wall opening, a second layer of door goes down. That's what we do when we go to people who already have walls up and start asking them questions that make them feel like we're leading them somewhere. A second wall goes up. So we have a different attitude in our dialogues. We're trying to play the worst game of poker ever. We're putting all of our cards on the table face up. I'll give you an example of this. Last year, my brother and I had 15 meetings with Mormons in my living room. This wasn't something I planned. I was at home one Saturday, my first weekend home in like 3 weeks. I think the kids were napping, and I was probably like resting playing Xbox. And the doorbell rings. And I open the door, and it's Mormons. I've never read the Book of Mormon. I don't know that much about it. It's not my area. And I'll admit, and it's bad. Like, I had a moment where I cared more about my rest than their souls. Like, I did not want this to happen right now. But luckily, they were charming and pushy enough that they got in my house. And once we started talking, like, I was really glad that it worked out. And we had a great conversation. And Tim was there for the other 14 meetings. It was really kind of an unfair thing. But It was great, and we learned so much about persuasion that I can't get into right now. I'm just going to tell you one story that has to do with this, though. We had 3 back-to-back meetings about the Trinity. I think of meetings like 11 through 13. It was towards the end. And there had been times where we had talked about a topic, they'd come over and we'd talk about a topic, and we kind of give up at some point, like we just like, I don't know where else we can go, and then they come back a few weeks later and we talk about something else. The first meeting about the Trinity was mainly Tim educating them about what Christians actually think the Trinity is, because they've been taught like some really stupid version of it. It's like, oh, Christians think 3 and 1 are like the same thing, like that level. So Tim's got paper and a pen, he's diagramming this thing out and trying to help them understand. And then the second meeting was mainly, we're throwing Bible verses at each other. You know, the way Christians do when they debate a topic. Like, they're not responding to our verses, they're just throwing more of their verses at us, that kind of thing. Yeah, you've been there. And so, Tim and I would brief before every meeting, we would debrief after every meeting. We're always like strategizing, like, how can we have better conversations? And sometimes we would let them kind of take the lead, and sometimes we would take the lead and be like, here's something that we really want to talk about. And so we'd come up with this idea together, but Tim was the one who did it. So Tim ends the second meeting this way. He says, I'm not ready for us to give up on the Trinity. I want you to come back in a couple of weeks and let's do one more on this. But let me just describe what I'm noticing biographically. Like, here's what my experience has been. It seems like there are so many verses in the Bible about the nature of God. We can't throw them all out at each other. But it seems like as we've been talking about different verses, it seems like there's like 3 buckets of verses. There's a bucket of verses that we think are pretty strong for the Trinity view. You've got some verses that you think are strong for not the Trinity view. And then there's a really big bucket in the middle of verses where we can both explain what's going on, like with our different presuppositions. Like, I used to think that Jesus' baptism was like the obvious Trinity verse. They're all there, you know? Like, I was like, it's really obvious. They've got their own way of explaining what's going on in Jesus' baptism. So it was a really surprising kind of experience for us. This was harder than we thought it was going to be. And so Tim said, so since there's so many verses, we can't talk about them all. We don't have time. So let's do something different next time. Let's do this David and Goliath style. You bring your 2 strongest verses here. I'm going to bring our 2 strongest verses. We'll let them duke it out, and we'll see if we can figure out who has the best view. And here's the thing. For the sake of transparency, I'm going to tell you what our 2 verses are right now. Pull out a pen. And Ryan, our favorite he's so awesome. I really care about Ryan. Ryan whips out this pad of paper and a pen so fast. I'd never seen it. He had this thing the whole time. He whips this thing out, and they are sitting literally at the edge of my couch as Tim explains to them what the arguments are going to be. I've got to guess that maybe you might want to know what he said. So just like real quick, here's what he said. I wrote it down because I haven't memorized this in a while. So he said, I'm not going to give you both verses. I'm not going to give you both verses because the second one gets into the Greek translation of Colossians 1:15 through 20. So for the sake of today, I'll tell you what the other thing is. So Tim said, our first verse is John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Now, we know the Word refers to Jesus because a few verses later, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So verse 3 says that all created things were made through Jesus. So then how then can Jesus be himself a creation of someone else? The answer is that he cannot have been a creation. Jesus is not a great spirit or a merely powerful man or a demigod or a brother of Satan. Jesus is God. So here's what's going on. They're sitting at the edge of the couch, and Tim is not just giving them the references, he's giving them in syllogism form the arguments he's going to make with those verses for the Trinity. And then he said, okay, so now you guys go home and you study up. You figure out what your 2 best verses are and how you want to respond to the 2 arguments I'm going to make in a couple of weeks. And we'll have a good conversation. Now, I'm watching them, and they're like hanging on every word coming out of his mouth. Why? Because no one does this. This is not what Trump and Clinton did before the awful debates last year. Like, they were not like sharing notes. You know, I think maybe I'm going to talk about these things. You know, it's not a Trump impression. It's just this is not what you do. It's not a good debate strategy, but it is an excellent dialogue strategy. Because the strategy is there's nothing up our sleeves. I'm just being transparent here. My generation cares so much about transparency. and authenticity. And so, like, I think that's one of the reasons this works so well is I'm making it obvious, like, I'm not trying to pull something on you. I'm not, like, trying to get you to answer these questions in a way that's going to end up causing you to be trapped or something. I'm just like, I just want to have a good conversation. I don't want us to win the exchange because we're quick on our feet. So fine, we got the truth on our side. Take all the advantage. Here, have all of our notes. Go work on it and then come back and let's have a conversation. So that's kind of the attitude. That's kind of the way that we do this. I'll give you one more story of me doing this. 2 years ago, a few weeks after I spoke at this conference, we came back to Portland to go do a training for a Students for Life Club at Portland Community College and then an outreach. We were there on April 20th, 420, pot day. I don't know how every pot day I end up on a college campus. But campus smelled interesting. And we talked to a lot of people who thought they were really philosophical. It's like they were utilitarians who were high. It's a different thing. But there we were. Our pictures that day were pretty ugly because we were inside. Usually we're outside, but we were inside. But it was a perfect location because we were right in front of the cafeteria. There were all these lanes of traffic. Some of you might know exactly what I'm talking about, but there's like all these lanes of traffic. Anyone who wanted to get lunch or had the munchies had to come through us. It was awesome. It was the best spot on campus that day, at least that day. And so I ended up in a conversation with a girl that I'm just going to call Rebecca. We actually did get a picture of this. I'm sitting on the table because this is where you'll usually find me at an outreach because I'm kind of a tall guy, and I hate it when tall guys lord their height over short women. It's just awkward. So this is kind of the position I can get in that gets me close enough to her eye line, as close as I can to her eye line without being weird and getting on my knees or something. So I'm trying to, and I'm just showing, this is me relaxed. I'm not tense, like, oh my gosh, this is pro-choice. Like, it's fine. It's going to be fine. So we're having a conversation. She's really pro-choice. I'm not feeling that optimistic about, like, what's going to happen. But we're talking, I'm listening. I'm asking her a lot of clarification questions and occasionally making arguments, but we hadn't, like, for the first 15 minutes, I was mainly asking questions and she was helping me understand her views. And then Gabriel showed up, not the angel. Gabriel, and I've thought about this. This is not hyperbole. Gabriel is the most obnoxious pro-life person I have ever spent time with on a college campus. I've been doing this since I was 18 years old. So that says something. Like, I've spent a lot of time with wonderful pro-life people. I've also spent some time with some pretty obnoxious pro-life people on campuses. And Gabriel, like, it's not even close. I did a talk about this, like, several months later, and this pro-life person came up to me and said, we just did a thing up where I met that guy. And I was like, did I exaggerate at all? He's like, no, he was awful. Okay, so I'm just saying that, like, I'm going to describe Gabriel. This is not an exaggeration for, like, comedic effect. Gabriel is really tall. He's a couple inches taller than me. He's got a really short, like, military crew cut. You might meet him. We're in Portland. Whatever. I don't care. He's got a really short haircut, dressed in, like, top to bottom, black leather trench coat, like Neo from The Matrix. And one expression on his face. Wasn't anger. His expression said, I am the smartest person here smartest person within 100 yards of this place. But I'm going to hang out here and play with you for a while, Mouse, for my own amusement. Yeah, there you go, Steven Seagal. Yeah, basically that look. I don't have pictures of him. We didn't take any pictures of him that day because I was hoping he would leave, and I was hoping I could forget him. I can't. He's burned into my memory. He stuck around for hours just to spite me. He really didn't like me. He said he was pro-life. He said he was part of the club. He's not. He's not part of the club. But he shows up, and he sees there's this pro-life thing going on, and this is what he basically sees when he walks up. And so he walks right up to this part of the table, directly across from Rebecca. And he gives her this smug look and says, do you believe this? Like, I don't remember the end of his sentence, but the context was like, this stupid thing pro-choice people believe. And then before she could even answer, he asked a second one. He's like, and do you believe this other stupid thing that pro-choice people believe? And I looked at Rebecca. I turned my head to her, and I could see her shut down. And I said, pause! Let's have a meta discussion. Let's have a discussion about the discussion. Okay, I've got a question for Rebecca. Rebecca, we're two pro-life men. Which one of us is more likely to change your mind about abortion today? And she said instantly, you. And I said, why? I want to know why. Why exactly did you say that? And she said, well, she said two things. She said, I like your body language. And then she said, and I quote, and I like the kinds of questions you ask. I was only asking clarification questions, and then when I had an argument, I made an argument. This dude was only asking obnoxious, leading questions, and it shut her down. It doesn't work. It's not subtle. And it messes up our dialogues. So I was going to talk about open-mindedness here, and instead I want to talk about something else, something I care a lot about. Tip number 7 is to make a pro-choice friend. I've actually talked about this several times with people coming by my booth. My booth's right out there. If you ever have that thing where it's like you wonder if like it'll be like annoying to speakers if you come up and like say hi or ask a question or take a selfie, please don't. Like bug me all day. That's my favorite thing. Please. So I've really good conversation with some of you, and this is something we've ended up talking about because this is, I think, one of the best things that pro-life adults like you can do. I think sidewalk counseling is better, and then this is like the second best. So I'm just going to describe a little bit about what I want pro-life people to. I have a vision for the pro-life movement. My vision is that everyone has pro-choice friends, actual friends, friendships that last for years. I'll give you an example. It was probably now something like, probably about 6 years ago, I think. A pro-choice person emails me, Deanna, and she'd seen me do a bodily rights thing on YouTube and thought that was really interesting. She was a pro-choice blogger, and she asked if we could talk, and she sent me like this essay of why she's pro-choice. She identified as an atheist, lesbian, pro-choice person from Canada. So you wouldn't think that we'd have a lot in common, being that she's from Canada. I like that joke. I had a Canadian one time almost fall out of their chair. Anyway, but we had enough to form a friendship. I could tell that she was smart. I could tell that she was open-minded. And that's enough. We had a similar sense of humor. We both like philosophy. We both like thought experiments. We started talking. We started emailing. About 140 emails later, like really long, wordy, nerdy emails later, we started Skyping. We'd Skype for hours at a time. If any of you are distracted by this, like my wife knows and is totally cool with it. Like a lot of my friends are. I've had a few Christians like really like distracted by this idea of cross-sex friendship. And anyway, you can talk to my wife. She's totally fine with it. And so we'd have these Skype sessions. And like we weren't only talking about abortion. We talked about abortion a lot, like mainly in the emails. And then we got to Skyping. A lot of times we'd be talking about it. Like I'm talking. Tell me about moving out of your parents' house for the first time. So he's asking me about my wife and my kids. We're talking about all kinds of issues. So you could tell that I cared about her. And then after something like a year and a half of friendship, she tells me that she's become pro-life. And I said, why? Like, what happened? What did it for you? And she described that she had been going privately through this 3-week kind of self-identity crisis. Because she was she was very philosophical. And so she said that she knew that all of her best arguments had been beaten soundly. And she's too philosophical to ignore that, to do the intellectually lazy thing and be like, I'm not going to think about that. She wasn't going to ignore that fact. But she had a lot of fear because her community, not just pro-choice, they're gay rights activists. Her Facebook newsfeed is a very colorful place, if you know what I mean. Okay, that's her culture. And she was afraid, what would happen if she said she's pro-life? Would she lose everyone in her life? And ultimately, she said she was able to kind of get over that, and she decided to go to the national pro-life, like March for Life that they have in Canada. She got a white t-shirt, she got a black Sharpie, and she wrote out the equal rights argument on it. And when went to this march, then came back, stood in front of a full-length mirror, and took a selfie, and posted it on Facebook. And on that day, she came out of the closet for the second time in her life. So I asked, we talked about that, and basically I said, how did you get over the fear of losing all these people? She said, well, I just figured out, like, even if that does happen, there's still one guy on the other side of the fence that I know would welcome me with open arms. And she was able to get over the fear of losing her entire community. Since then, we've met. We actually met to do a speaking event here in Portland a couple of years ago. This story is a little bit complicated for me to tell because it's hard. It's hard for me to even know how to tell the story right now because it's gotten a little bit complicated. Deanna is now Andrew. Deanna is now self-identifies as a transgendered man. And so kind of the pronoun thing, and people get really worked up about the pronoun thing, and I'm still thinking about how to do this in public. I wasn't planning on talking about this today. So I'm calling her she because I think that she is a woman, and I call her Andrew because you can legally change your name. That's kind of where I'm at right now. At some point, maybe I'll be doing this differently. But the point is, I still love this person. We still Skype. We still have really heavy conversations. Anyway, here's the point. There's a couple of reasons why I think pro-life people should do this. One is kind of this obvious pragmatic argument. Like it is, you are going to be more persuasive to your actual friends than you are the people that you intellectually spar with on Facebook. You're just going to be more effective with people you're actually friends with. But I need you to hear that that's not the only argument for doing this. Andrew is not just a notch on my pro-life belt. It is just good for me to love Andrew. It is a good in and of itself. I was talking about our friendship well before she became pro-life. And I was telling people, like, it doesn't, like, even if she never becomes pro-life, I'm going to love this person because it's good. It is right. Jesus is so much more different from you and me than I am from a lesbian atheist pro-choice blogger in Canada. Now transgender person in Canada. Like, Jesus loved us even when we were yet sinners, right? Like it makes so much sense. Of course we should be friends with people who are different from us. It's good for at least one person to be trying his damnedest to be Jesus to an atheist who doesn't know him. Like, of course it's good just for us to love people. And it's also awesome if they become pro-life or become saved through that. Like, of course that's good too. But that's not the only point here. I want to see us become a more loving movement. We started Equal Rights Institute because my brother and I were stuck in a conference room working on a book together, and one of us made the observation that the pro-life movement is not known for its love. And that's really affected us. Like, that is kind of like how ERI started. It's like, we need to work on that. And then I said, we're not known for being a thoughtful group of people either. It's like, those are two really big problems. But we can work on that. And so if you're an adult wondering, like, well, what do I do? Like, I would encourage you to get trained up. I don't think what you've heard today is sufficient to be able to respond to all the pro-choice arguments. There's some really thoughtful, philosophical pro-choice arguments. I think the best responses you're going to get are in our course. So you should totally get that. But regardless, you should figure out how can you become a friend with a pro-choice person. You say, like, you find someone and you say, can we do something different? Can we do something radically different? We're in Portland. We're all about being weird, right? Let's do something weird. Let's do the opposite of how everyone debated politics last year, because that was bananas. Can I buy you coffee? And can we talk about abortion? Or is this at this pro-life conference? I've been thinking about this a lot. I know you're pro-choice. I would love to hear more about your views. You don't even have to hear my views right now if you don't want to. I really want to get to know, like, learn more about where you're coming from. Because I haven't spent enough time with pro-choice people. I've been in an echo chamber. That's not good. I want to have more kind of intellectual diversity in my life. So would you help me with that? Would you tell me about your pro-choice views and I'll just listen? What if everybody did that? Then we have a completely different pro-life movement that the pro-choice movement cannot ignore. Like, as Catherine and Jewel said, like, there are more abortion clinic people coming out because they can tell, like, they're going to be loved from this movement. Like, what if we did that with, like, just normal pro-choice advocates? If we can do it with the clinic workers, we can definitely do it with the pro-choice people. Anyway, I'm on a soapbox now, so thanks.